Last week, I had the privilege to attend an Interfaith Panel Discussion, followed by my first ever Kosher for Passover Iftar Break the Fast. The discussion was about what comes after death, but I was totally taken by the life in the room. The connection to God and commitment to curiosity was palpable. There seemed to be no wrong answers. The program began with the Jewish evening prayers and concluded with something I have never before stood to witness, but have only heard hundreds of times in Israel, the Muslim call to prayer. How is it that a woman who has felt the holiness of Jerusalem felt deja vu in Jacksonville? And that is what we are going to tackle today. You know those people who never go to the doctor and then finally go to discover they are so out of sorts they need an abundance of referrals for specialists to solve their myriad of long brewing diagnoses and conditions, and they say, "See, I was perfectly fine until I saw a doctor." Well, how about the inventor who works her day job and plugs away and plugs away and plugs away every night after work? No social life, no friends, and all of a sudden the idea explodes and she is touted as a genius. But nobody mentions that it took 20 years to become that overnight success. That's how I feel about my interfaith journey. 7 years ago, I remember reading the notice for this same event and not wanting to attend. This year, my guest, the Executive Director of Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida, Rebekah Hutto, co-hosted with the Jacksonville Jewish Center, and how could I say no? Welcome, Rebekah.
Thank you, Susie. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure having you on. So, I want to explain a little bit about why I didn't attend 7 years ago. 7 years ago, I was actually working at the Jacksonville Jewish Center as a preschool teacher, and I remember reading the notice and thinking, wow, that seems completely inappropriate. We're going to be carrying a service for another faith on a Jewish holiday in our synagogue. And I remember turning my nose up and walking out.
Why?
I had a history of bias. My mom's Israeli. I have a lot of family that lives in Israel, and I was in New York City in 9/11, and so I had decades of what I considered opinions and based on experiences, or so I thought. But then when I looked at my actual interactions with Muslim people, individuals, I realized that none of those biases pertain to the actual people I was interacting with. Do you find that experience happens more or less often?
Well, I think having been in New York for 8 years, post 9/11, I feel like many of the Muslim brothers and sisters that I met felt like their role as a person of faith was to constantly explain who they were as a Muslim person to push back against all the biases and the stereotypes. And so what I find in my relationships, interfaith relationships, is that I have so much to learn. I didn't grow up with friends or a family of different faiths, and it wasn't until high school, or actually college and grad school, where I really interacted and finally learned about folks from other religions, and it happened through relationship. And so when I was in New York, I grieved for my Muslim friends having to constantly fight against the bias and having to explain their faith, which there's a history behind this meal between Parvez Ahmed and Rabbi Lubliner working on their friendship, pushing past their biases.
Yes, and I've watched this happen over the last 7 years because I've been part of the community. And through that time, I have had the opportunity, because if my oldest is turning 11, there's no surprise that the correlation between me becoming more open-minded and navigating the world through a broader lens coincides with me having to teach how to navigate the world with an open mind and through a broader lens. So you said something that was interesting. I did grow up in a very closed community. It was an exclusively Jewish community, and I went to all Jewish schools until I graduated high school. What was your upbringing like?
Well, I grew up in the Bible Belt in South Carolina.
Oh, just like me. No, I'm kidding.
Everything I knew was Christian. I one of the reasons that one of the things I love to push in interfaith work is it's about curiosity. It's not about conversion. And I think not specifically my church, I don't want to pick on my home church, but in the culture I grew up in, it was, you have to believe just like me. There was no dialogue around difference. And even within the Christian community, if we differed on something, then we went to another church, we split up. So I grew up in a heavily, heavily Christian environment.
I like what you just said about creating curiosity and leaning into that curiosity where conflict used to live. And I think that's personally what happened to me. I had to ask myself by the second year, wait, why aren't you going? There's nobody, literally nobody that's going to show up at this event that could have had a relation to you on September 11th of that year, or was in Jerusalem when you were shot at by a terrorist. So I had experiences that were very real, and they lent to my perception. But as a grown-up, I also had to admit how flawed my thinking was. And in order to move past it, Dr. Edith Eger, she's a Auschwitz survivor and a psychologist, she says you have to feel it to heal it. And I really had to feel the gross that I felt when I would think thoughts that at that point were confusing because they didn't seem organic to me. I'm not really that kind of person. I don't have hate in me. I wasn't raised with hate necessarily, but it was bias. And if we don't address the bias, it could turn into something worse. So talk to me about how it is that you navigate these discussions. In what way do you engage people and you bring them together?
Well, I do think it is a kind of person that wants to engage in this conversation. It has to be a kind of person who's open to curiosity. Just within my faith tradition, there's certainly large segments that believe in converting the other and constantly trying to get the other to convert to their way of thinking. So it has to begin with people who are open to curiosity. I would love to be a person that could step beyond that, but I think it's particularly in these times very difficult. I always approach it from an aspect of learning. As I was cooking in the kitchen, needing to be kosher for Passover, constantly asking questions, going, why can't I use this? What about this? And being guided by those who are from that faith tradition, or peering over to a Muslim sister of mine who's cooking an incredible dish and asking how all those pieces come together. So the way I approach these conversations or friendships or dialogue is always trying to learn, assuming that I'm walking in not knowing anything.
That's the way I used to teach my preschool classroom. And it turns out that that's the way I've started to navigate my entire life. Thanks to people like you who are in my atmosphere, right? Because when you start to think like that, inadvertently, the universe starts sending more people like that to you. And I know sometimes it feels like we're preaching to the choir every time I show up at an interfaith event now, because now I'm out and about. Now that the koala bears are not climbing this eucalyptus tree and my children can be left alone at these drop-off parties, I have been afforded the great privilege to attend a number of cultural events that really take the opportunity to explain what unites us, right? We're all children of God. And when we come from that perspective, it's much easier to look for the opportunities for two solutions for every problem instead of two problems for every solution. So how is it that you came up with your mission for this Interfaith Northeast Florida?
So it actually began 7 years ago. Mark Woods did a beautiful write-up for us in the Florida Times Union, interviewing the panelists and revealing some of the history. And it had to do with our board president, Yildirim Savar, and one of our board members, Parvez Ahmed, had done an educational program in Jerusalem. And as Muslim men came back to Jacksonville saying, we don't want this process to end. We want to continue the conversation. We want to grow our friendships with our Jewish neighbors. And as two Muslim men met Rabbi Lubliner and said, what can we do together that would help expand our learning, our friendship with each other? And they brought together the two communities. Our organization, the Interfaith Center, largely began with a bunch of intellectually curious and faith-abiding Muslim men and women who wanted to learn. And so when they developed this friendship with Rabbi Lubliner, now that we're in our 7th year, we expanded it this year because it was in the Easter holiday, and we brought in Dean Kate from the cathedral, who actually is both Rabbi Lubliner and Dean Kate went to Vassar, and so they were swapping stories about professors and dorm rooms and all that kind of
connection.
Fun. But she's been here 13 years. I think Rabbi Lubliner's been here more than 15.
Yes,
they had never met each other. And so this was the first time that they had really come together, and it was so fun to watch them on Melissa Ross. All 3 have been on Melissa Ross multiple times, but they had never really connected with each other. And so just watch that friendship develop, and it's going to continue to develop. It allows the rest of us who are in the room to see them, to see their trust with each other, and then we can have that same trust when we go to eat at tables with folks who we don't know in the area.
Yes, you concluded the panel by asking people to sit with someone that they don't know, and I did. I looked around the room, and I sat with people that I didn't know at all, and it was interesting because the gentleman that I was sitting with was of Turkish descent, and I had said that it was a very interesting time for me. He went back and he asked me, so where are you from? And we talked about New York and 9/11. And when we went back to that, right, because they expressed to me in the conversation that some of the biases that stemmed back, this is decades now, right? And here we are, we're moving past this. But for people, it's fresh on their mind without really asking the questions. Are we using these terms very loosely when we say interfaith? So one of the things that you just said that I thought was fantastic, it's about conversation, not conversion. Mm-hmm. There's a common misconception, and I say this because when I speak in the community at various, and it's different places of worship and it's different public speaking engagements, and I mention interfaith, the first thing people ask is, do you mean intermarriage?
Yeah. That was a connection I didn't know until you talked to me about that.
That's interesting because when you said conversation, not conversion, it sounds like the same thing. Interfaith and intermarriage are being used interchangeably, like conversion and conversation in the sphere of interfaith, when we want to make it abundantly clear that it's not. It's a collaboration. So could we use the word collaboration when we're talking about interfaith spaces?
Yeah, I think it starts with conversation. But yeah, collaborating on different tasks, different mission projects. One of the things that I don't do in interfaith is try various diverse groups to boil down to a common denominator. I think it's important to recognize our differences, celebrate our differences. Actually, this year, when we chose the topic for the event, Parvez said, you know what, we always talk about something we agree on, let's talk about something we disagree on. And I love that they've come to a point where they can do that, because we don't want to boil down to a common denominator. We want to celebrate how we're different. But as we are different, there are things that we have in common and can serve together and collaborate together. I also want to broaden interfaith to say, because our organization serves those who are religious and non-religious, and there's a huge swath of particularly our young people who aren't lining up with one religion over the other. And so to see folks of a religion come together from different backgrounds and different perspectives, I think allows them an open door to come in without a religion. But we always want to, you can be a person of no faith or you can be in an interfaith community. Because we've got a lot here in Jacksonville that we need to come together on.
All right, so let me ask you this. What about if people ask me, Judaism, is it a faith? Is it a religion? Is it a culture? It's an all of the above. It's a culture, identity, faith. It's my blood. It's my hair. It's every part of me. So when you say people who don't necessarily have religion, is that agnostic? Right? Is that
just
atheist?
Don't identify.
They just don't identify?
Parvez referred to it as the unmossed in his tradition. I would say the unchurched in my tradition, but folks who aren't identifying with one particular community, one particular institution, or actually a physical mosque, synagogue, church.
But the spirituality is there.
Yes.
So that sounds like every 20s and 30s, with all due respect, unless you were somehow in a seminary or you were deeply intrinsically involved in your faith. I think we all sort of go through that, or at least I know I did in college, and, leaving this umbrella of safety, right? Because my Jewish background and my upbringing and my heritage and the history is so ingrained in me that being Jewish is just, I often joke I'm the Jewiest Jew you ever did see, right? But when I got to college, not the college I went to in Israel, because there obviously it continued for another, but when I went back to the state school and I didn't have to commit to a checkbox, I sort of felt like I was Jewish enough. I've always been this person. Do I have to go to services to still be this? Is that the same, or is it just an absence of identifying with anything at all?
Well, I think some of it is pushing away from that religious institution that has hurt them or hurt friends of theirs. One of our awardees that we are recognizing next month, Alejandra Amagin, who works at Viva Yoga, talks very specifically about her needing healing coming from the Catholic Church, but also reaching out to the folks who come in her yoga studio interested in spirituality but have been hurt by some form of institutionalized religion. And so what I see, that yes, there's that journey of kind of, I don't have to attend every service, I don't have to do this, but I've also been hurt and I'm distrustful of institutionalized religion. And so the more that we engage dialogue and come together, we say, you know what, we don't want this to be a place that hurts you. We want to be a place of healing and conversation.
This to me is, I think, the big takeaway, actually. I want to talk more about this. I don't think we address enough what our trauma or triggers are from before we become capable of making our own choices, right? Through childhood, we don't realize it at the time, but we're oftentimes watching our parents grow up as well. And they might be going through a conflict that predates us. There's a generational trauma that we have no knowledge of. We're just experiencing this. And so for me, having grandparents who were Holocaust survivors, obviously being Jewish was very intrinsically aligned with who I am. The observance, I noted, without it ever being spoken, that I had a grandfather who, I don't know if he had any belief, if he could have any belief after his wife and 4 children were murdered. He went through the motions, but I don't think I ever saw any deep spirituality in his eyes. And so I don't know if that translated down, right? It wasn't until I met people outside of my family. It was teachers and educators and faith leaders who brought the beauty of the religion back to me as an adult, where I embraced it again. So is it perhaps the opportunity to capture, for lack of a better word, that market, right? The target demographic of people, because there is a correlation between the loss of faith and the increase in mental health conditions. Studies are showing this more and more. So are you finding that there's an outreach?
That's what we really want to have. I took this position in last July, and as the board continues to come together, it continues to come up as how can we connect with this particular population. And we recently brought a board member on who's a grad student at UNF, and that's really Melesha's role, is to educate us as a board about that population, what they might need in gatherings, but also to help introduce us to more folks in that particular group. I'll say that this past Saturday I was invited to a woman's house who was having a Baha'i worship service, and I didn't know. I've met her. We have common friends. I don't know a lot about the Baha'i faith, but I took my daughter with me. It was a breakfast and worship of various faith groups, and my daughter automatically, as a 12-year-old, has curiosity.
Yeah.
She's not going to approach it. I don't think she should approach it as she knows everything, not yet. But she was asking lots of questions, and I kind of wanted to see it through her eyes to say, well, she can be this curious with most of my husband and I are pastors. As a double preacher's kid, how can I be that curious? And so it was fantastic to be in that community and learn about their worship style, their openness, their unity, and see how that could really bring folks together who might have had hurt from the past.
Is there any consideration in maybe putting together like a calendar of upcoming celebrations for next year so that there's some forethought and people who are interested in learning about cultural celebrations?
That's our plan. We have our big awards dinner next month on May 18th, and that will really intentionally bring together a variety of different faith groups. And as our board meets to brainstorm in June for the next year, we want to grow those connections. It was great to see how this one woman jumped to me. She said, I would love to be involved in the prayers, anything that you're doing for the service. I would really, she just invited me to her home after seeing her for the first time last Monday.
We also joined a book club, or I joined a book club because of you. I've seen this book club in the past since I've gotten to Jacksonville, Daughters of Abraham. It's the Abrahamic faiths, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. And each month, this group of women get together and we read a book that's mutually chosen through a collective national, is it national or international? But it's
mainly national, but award winners too from each faith tradition.
Yeah, but the group is national. There's not just a Jacksonville branch, there's many.
Yes.
And one of your awards recipients is, in fact, the president of the Jacksonville chapter, correct?
She founded it, and one of the reasons we're giving her the award, the Mutual Curiosity Award, because in her story as to why she founded it, she was curious to know. She's been here, I think she told me 31 years in Jacksonville, but she was really curious to know about the spiritual lives of other faith groups. And so she started this all, and she kept it alive during COVID when we were on screens. And so we're honoring her very specifically with the Mutual Curiosity Award because it takes curiosity in order to engage in these relationships.
Absolutely, and it's been a privilege since I joined this group. I feel like it's the highlight of my month. Every book that I've read has been so impactful, and especially the ones, it happened to be that the first one was an Israeli book, and it touched me very deeply. But the next one was, the most recent one was also so special, and it wasn't
Short
my
stories,
faith,
yeah.
and it was even more interesting. What I find is the more time I spend in the interfaith community, the closer I feel to my own spirituality. It's not a defensiveness. There's a beauty in embracing what I bring to the table as a daughter of God, and what I can see other people bring to that same table. And I say table because every time I see you, there's some kind of food.
That's the best way to come together.
That's the best way to come together. So here's what I keep at home. This here is the 30-second religion, the 50 most thought-provoking religious beliefs, each explained in half a minute. Barnes & Noble, it's $10. That's it. It's $9.99. Right? It was 50% off of the $19.99. That's how much religion rates these days. 50% off at Barnes & Noble. And quite literally, what I love about this is that it doesn't just talk about one branch of every religion. It distinguishes all of the different ones, the Abrahamic traditions, the different branches of the various types of Orthodoxy, Judaism, Islam, even some of the religions that, we don't often talk about. And I leave this out on my coffee table, and I tell my kids, it's not for you. Don't touch it. So what do you think happens, Rebekah?
Of course, they open it and touch it. They might even lose it at some point.
They're looking at this.
Yeah.
They're looking at this. And I think that is such a special thing, because what I am most proud of in this evolving landscape of Jacksonville in the 8 years that I've been here is that I'm seeing the cultural diversity that people are proudly displaying, most likely in response to acts of hatred. So do you have upcoming family events that you're thinking about putting together where children can engage in these types of community experiences to learn?
I would love to have events for children. I continue to bring
Call
my
me.
children.
I'll be happy to. I'm happy to help.
We were brainstorming with this dinner last Monday about a youth component, and it was really hard to get all the matching schedules up together. But I was able to contact youth leaders in the Jewish and Muslim and Christian communities of how we can bring those youth together to have those conversations. But I would love to see it with younger ages. My son's two good friends that he met on a T-ball league are members at the temple, and they invite us to events. We invite them to events, and it's been really great to share that friendship with them. He's not at the age where he knows to ask questions about their holidays, but my daughter, when she shows up, definitely asks. And so I think the more that we can extend the invitation for significant holidays coming up, let's do it. I want to get the younger kids involved.
Was that you inviting me? I felt like that was an invitation,
Yeah.
or is that just me fishing for an invitation? It could be either way, because I love to be invited. I love, love, love exposing my children to the things that I was not exposed to. And that is where I draw the hope for this next generation. It's not in the problems that we're facing. It's in the parents and in the educators that I'm speaking to who are saying, don't worry about the big noise. That big noise out there, it's designed to draw your attention, right, away from doing your job, staying in your lane, being focused, right? I don't want to use the word the devil, but let's just say, hypothetically speaking, there's a lot of noise about all the bad stuff and all the gross. So if we stay focused on what we want to accomplish as a community, as a city, do you see success in your future here?
Yes, I see success in just watching. I took photos of the various tables at the event last Monday, and just looking at the smiles and looking at the diversity around the table and the diversity of the plates at the table and what folks were eating. That gives me a lot of hope. And those are the things that I want to focus on, those kind of friendships that can be developed. You invited my family, I believe, over to Shabbat at your family's house. So
yes.
I'll say I'll accept that invitation so that my children can learn about that particular practice in your home. But yeah, let's do it.
I love it. Do you have any goals for your time for the next year? Let's set you some goals.
Well, I have been in Jacksonville. This summer will be 3 years, and we spent the first half of that really in quarantine and behind masks. And so the last 18 months have been such a breath of fresh air as I've gotten to meet more colleagues and connect with more communities. And I want to continue to do that. I've really enjoyed the relationships and friendships that I have made within the Jewish community. And slowly I'm learning about the variety of mosques in the area. But just meeting this Baha'i community last Saturday and meeting some of their worshipers, I want to know more about the Hindu festivals that are going on. I want to continue to learn. So my goal is to make more connections so that we have invitations to these meals that are more and more diverse, and that we can celebrate that diversity, and that folks feel that our organization is a safe space to gather when we're diverse, and that there's no threat of conversion or there's no threat of pressure, but really just getting to know one another.
Right. It's a safe space. It's a brave space for being allies and advocates for each other. So my goal for you is that you're going to keep me in the loop on all these upcoming events, because I am enjoying your orbit. I think you have brought an exponential amount of energy and drive to this community's need to just connect. And it's so greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you for that compliment. It's a passion of mine. And I'm someone who has my own baggage about being hurt by the church. And so to be able to heal in this way and grow together with folks of different backgrounds is a real gift. And I continue to say I have a lot to learn.
And we're so lucky that you're doing your learning and teaching here in Jacksonville. Would you share where we can connect with Interfaith Northeast Florida?
Sure. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, Interfaith NEFL. You can also find us on our website, same thing, Interfaith NEFL. And we do have our upcoming event, which has been advertised on Eventbrite and on all of our channels. This 2023 Interfaith Community Awards Dinner, we're actually focusing on fighting hate together.
Yes.
Rather than have entertainment at the event, we're going to have a keynote and very intentional table conversations about how we can come together with the rise of hate and support each other and love each other.
Well, my ticket is bought.
I know, I saw it. May 18th.
May 18th. And where will it take place?
We'll be at the UNF at the University Center.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rebekah, for being here. Usually at this point, I do my honorable mention, but my honorable mention needs your help. So it is now time for our honorable mention. Mensch is the Yiddish word for a person of integrity and honor with a sense of what is right and responsible. This week's honorable mensch is your husband.
Wow.
BJ Hutto,
Wow,
who is
thank
the
you.
pastor of Hendricks Avenue Baptist Church right here in Jacksonville. That church has been a beacon for so many people for so many years here in Jacksonville, a place where they feel safe and heard. Can you share a couple of reasons why BJ gets our honorable mensch?
That's really beautiful. He's working very hard. He too came in the midst of quarantine and pandemic, and like most religious leaders trying to figure out who they are post-pandemic, if we're post-pandemic yet. He was cooking in the kitchen last week. He has the great gift of hospitality and welcome, and he's doing really well in the first ever senior pastor position that he's had of a church this size. And gosh, you put me on the spot getting to praise my husband, but I am thrilled to be in ministry with him, thrilled to be supportive of the work that he does at HAB and the partners that we have at HAB that come into this interfaith circle.
Eshet Chayil Miyimsa, woman of valor. And I am so lucky to have gotten to know you and to have had the pleasure to meet your husband as well. And I look forward to spending more time at Interfaith Northeast Florida and at your events.
Thank you. Thank you so much.